Hello and welcome to another TLDR Global video. With a world-leading vaccination program underway, the people of Israel have gone to the polls for the fourth time in 2 years. So in this video we'll take a look at the exact forces at play, what the elections could mean for Israel and its leadership, and more importantly, why on earth the Israelis are heading to the polls yet again. If you want more content like this from us, then make sure to subscribe to the channel. We're trying to get to 100,000 subscribers as fast as we can, and with a big percentage of you yet to click the button, we could get there pretty soon. So lend us a hand and make sure you don't miss out on any other TLDR Global videos by checking if you're subscribed, and if you're not, hitting that button. Thanks for your support. It's relatively uncontroversial to say that Israeli politics are complicated. Beyond even just the broader Israeli-Palestine conflict, something we simply don't have time to get into in this video, this current bout of instability has been a few years in the making. Since 2019, an outright stable majority in the Israeli parliament, or Knesset, hasn't been possible on either side. The current Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu himself, has only been able to remain Prime Minister as caretaker between the collapse of coalitions, or by setting up extremely fragile ones himself. Coalitions sometimes formed with explicit enemies. Under the Basic Law of Israel, the formation of a government takes a predefined structure. Within 7 days of the election results being formally published and verified, the president invites a designated Knesset member to try and form a government. The government then have 28 days, or upon an extension, 42 days to form. The designated member typically being the leader of the party with the most seats. If they're unsuccessful, the president calls upon another Knesset member to try and do the same thing, again giving them 28 days. If they're also unsuccessful, it opens up to the entire Knesset to try and find a majority for a government that can withstand a motion of no confidence. If after all of this no government can be found, then new elections have to be held. And so after the elections in April 2019, where Netanyahu's Likud party received 35 seats, he was chosen as the designated member to form a government, which he failed to do. Rather than turn to Benny Gantz from the Blue and White Party, who also commanded 35 seats, Parliament dissolved itself, leading to new elections in September of that year. And so, in September, Israel went to the polls again, where yet again, neither party managed to get a majority, nor were they able to form a stable coalition. With that, yet another election was set for April 2020. While the March election did see Netanyahu increase his seat share to 36, he still didn't possess a majority. But finally, a coalition was on the cards. After a tense period of negotiations, and in light of the coronavirus pandemic beginning to take hold, Netanyahu and Benny Gantz agreed to form a unity government. Under the terms of the coalition, the premiership would rotate. Netanyahu would stay on as Prime Minister for 18 months before passing the baton to Gantz. The question nonetheless arises, why are they having a fourth election in 2 years? And why is it even happening right now? The answer has two aspects, Netanyahu and, well, Netanyahu. In the first instance, the coalition has been plagued by infighting, specifically around the budget. A deadline had been set to pass budget legislation, but Netanyahu, towards the tail end of November, said that the budget couldn't be passed by then, delaying it until February, something his coalition partner, Benny Gantz, refused to believe or accept. In Gantz's view, the delayed budget was a ploy, and according to the Times of Israel, the delayed budget would allow Netanyahu to remain Prime Minister beyond the 18 months laid out in the coalition agreement. So, following the failure to reach an agreement on the budget, and Netanyahu's seeming reluctance to hand over power, Parliament was dissolved. Which brings us on to problem 2, Netanyahu. Netanyahu is currently under investigation for corruption charges. In November 2019, he was charged by the Attorney General with bribery, fraud, and breach of trust, having been, according to the BBC, alleged to receive gifts as well as dispensed favours in an attempt to improve press coverage, charges that Netanyahu strongly denies. To obviously prevent the investigation and charges from going any further, Netanyahu would have to obtain immunity from prosecution. Conveniently, while members of the Knesset don't automatically have such immunity, they can request it. And so that's exactly what Netanyahu did. saying that in order to continue to lead Israel to great achievements, I intend to approach the Speaker of the Knesset in accordance with Chapter 4c of the law in order to fill my right, my duty, my mission to continue to serve you for the future of Israel. Such a request for immunity has to be considered by the Knesset's House Committee before eventually being put before the entire parliament for a vote. And if the majority votes for granting immunity, then, well, so be it. The issue here being that the House Committee doesn't actually exist. Caretaker governments are ultimately extremely limited in what they can do. They, for instance, cannot carry out any major legislation, nor are they able to pass budgets or make administrative appointments. For instance, the formation of the House Committee. Luckily for Netanyahu, proceedings against him cannot continue until the House Committee meet to discuss the request and put it before Israel's parliament, which has ultimately led to this election being watched by many, and it being seen as a referendum on Netanyahu and whether he ought to be granted immunity. This question of Netanyahu's legal status made coalition negotiations far from easy. According to France 24, the Blue and White Party point-blank refuses to sit in a government led by an indicted prime minister, having only joined the unity government in light of the pandemic. Had, for instance, the two parties, Likud led by Benjamin Netanyahu and Blue and White led by Benny Gantz, agreed to form a coalition in the aftermath of the 2019 elections, they would have collectively held 70 seats, 9 more than the required 61, giving them a majority and likely stopping all of these elections. Regardless, that didn't happen, with the two sides clearly not seeing eye to eye and disagreeing on a number of issues. That meant that we were forced into yet another election on Tuesday, and that election doesn't exactly paint a clear picture. With just under 90% of the votes counted at the time of writing, Netanyahu's Likud party is on course to win just 30 seats, with the opposition in the region of 17 or 18. In essence, neither side has a clear path to a majority. When taking into account partnerships and coalitions, Netanyahu's right-wing bloc will amount to 59 seats, 2 seats above the 61 threshold. The left-wing bloc is not far behind on 56 seats, but due to fragmentation between them, it's seen as unlikely that the left-wing bloc will coalesce. There is, however, a tenuous path for Netanyahu, in the form of winning over the Arab party, Ra'am. In a radio interview early on Wednesday morning, Ra'am's leader did not rule out joining either side, stressing that we are not in anyone's pocket. We're prepared to engage with both sides. Ra'am is set to win 5 seats, precisely the number of seats required to tip the scales either way. Were they to join Netanyahu in an extremely broad coalition of Jewish ultra-Orthodox, ultra-nationalists and Arab parties, he would have 64 seats, a secure majority. Were they to join the left-wing bloc, they'd have 61 seats, also a majority, just. Whether the right-wing bloc would even remain united and grant Netanyahu's wish of immunity is a whole separate question though, and it's possible we could find ourselves back here in the future. The only thing we can say for certain though is that the 2 years of deadlock certainly aren't going to end anytime soon. If anything, Israel could be heading back to its 5th election in under 2 years in the weeks and months ahead. But what do you think? Is there a clear path to break this deadlock? Is Israel in a catch-22 situation, in that a majority for Netanyahu requires him to dispose of his legal problems, but in order to do so, he needs a majority? As always, let us know your thoughts on this situation and the election as a whole in the comments below. Be sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon to be notified every time we release new videos. Special thanks to our Patreon backers who make videos like this one possible. And if you want to see your name at the end of videos, then you too can back us on Patreon. The link to that's in the description.